let's head back into the world of Android-based devices, and it's time to check out what REDMAGIC has been cooking up in the mobile space, perhaps with something a bit more elite. And you better believe it, REDMAGIC is back with their newest flagship entry, the REDMAGIC 10 Pro, which represents 10 generations of REDMAGIC and is powered by Qualcomm's latest and greatest, the Snapdragon 8 Elite chipset that promises to bring a significant boost in power over the prior generation. It marks the debut in the mobile space with Qualcomm's shift to their new Orion CPU architecture. Combined with REDMAGIC's gaming focus, the new 10 Pro promises to bring quite the package for those serious about gaming, performance, and the cutting edge. So, please join me, Rob the Retro Tech Dad, as we join the Elite and explore the brand new REDMAGIC 10 Pro. Let's first go ahead and talk about the specs, price, and do a quick unboxing and tour of the new REDMAGIC 10 Pro. I think it's pretty obvious straight away that we have the new REDMAGIC 10 in hand with the large X on the package, and it's a very clean package with not a whole lot of branding on it. Since this is the first time that we've seen the Snapdragon 8 Elite on the channel, there's a lot of excitement for me personally to see what it brings to the table. And the Snapdragon 8 Elite, as I mentioned, marks a shift for Qualcomm to their new custom Orion CPU architecture, and it's definitely no slouch, which features 8 cores and clock speeds up to 4.32 GHz on the Orion Gen 2 Prime and up to 3.5 GHz on the Orion Gen 2 Performance cores, and uses the 3nm Taiwan Semiconductor fab process. It features the newest Adreno 830 GPU for graphics and brings to the table support for things like Unreal Engine 5.3, which is a first for a mobile chipset. And that's not the only first here, as REDMAGIC 10 Pro ships with a new 6.85-inch AMOLED display at a resolution of 2688 by 1216, with a peak brightness of 2000 nits and a refresh rate of 144 Hz. The screen has a 95.3% screen-to-body ratio, which REDMAGIC claims is the highest ever seen on a mobile device, and even outperforms prior generations of the REDMAGIC lineup. The REDMAGIC 10 Pro will be available in several configurations, starting with 12GB of LPDDR5X RAM and 256GB of UFS 4.1 storage in the Shadow model, and 16GB of RAM and 512GB of storage for the Moonlight and Dusk models, which is the model I have on hand here. REDMAGIC will also be releasing an Ultra variant of the 10 Pro, which features 24GB of RAM and 1TB of storage. Unfortunately, the REDMAGIC 10 Pro does not feature any expandable storage on any of their models, so definitely consider your use cases to determine which model would work best for you. And of course, on board we've got Wi-Fi, Bluetooth 5.4, USB Type-C for data, charging, and video out, as well as a 3.5mm audio port, NFC support, and a fingerprint sensor. On the front, we have the return of the 16MP under-display camera, and on the back, a dual 50MP camera system that provides optical image stabilization with no camera bump outs that allows the REDMAGIC 10 Pro to have a completely flat design. Out of the box, we have REDMAGIC OS 10.0, which is built on Android 15. And REDMAGIC has somehow managed to increase the battery capacity to 7050 mAh despite retaining the same footprint. And the 10 Pro supports 100-watt fast charging as well as charging separation. We will definitely be diving into the battery later on in this video to test its capabilities. Now inside the package, we do have a clear case, the 100-watt fast charge capable power adapter, the always slick REDMAGIC USB-C cable, and some of the usuals like a warranty card and the SIM tool. The REDMAGIC 10 Pro will be available later in the month direct from the REDMAGIC website, and early bird access will begin on December 12th and will end on December 17th, with open sales beginning on December 18th. The 10 Pro will be available in many regions including North America, Europe, the UK, Asia, and beyond, and somehow manages to retain the lower price point that REDMAGIC is known for, with the 12GB, 256GB Shadow model starting at $649 and $799 for the 16GB, 512GB Moonlight and Dusk models, with the Ultra 24GB 1TB model available for $999. I'd like to thank REDMAGIC for providing me the 10 Pro ahead of launch so that I could provide my viewers with the most detailed information, and as I always require, this video was not reviewed prior to publishing. Now, one thing that REDMAGIC devices have been known for quite some time is the inclusion of active cooling, which certainly sets it apart from other devices in the space, and for me personally was one of the reasons I became a fan of the brand back in 2022 when I purchased my first REDMAGIC device, the 8 Pro. The active cooling is critical to help these cutting-edge chipsets running at its optimal speed for as long as possible. And not much changes here with the 10 Pro, and we do see the return of that active cooling, which features a fan that spins at 23,000 RPM and definitely moves hot air away from the device. But the cooling system in the 10 Pro goes beyond just its inclusion of the fan, as the 10 Pro is the first smartphone that uses their ICE-X cooling system, which features liquid metal technology, and REDMAGIC claims this combination is up to 19 times as effective as traditional cooling materials and uses an 11-layer structure which includes a vapor chamber as well as graphene and copper insulation. And it's definitely obvious that REDMAGIC spent some time focusing on keeping the Snapdragon 8 Elite as cool as possible, and it will be very exciting to see how this translates into real-world performance in just a little bit. The design language continues some of the traditions, including RGB lighting that is fully customizable for the 10 Pro, and for the 10 Pro it is available in all 4 models. Now on the model that I have here, REDMAGIC is utilizing a full rear glass design, and has expanded on the transparent elements by 30%. So we have more to admire here on the back, and I do like the small subtle touches of the illuminated REDMAGIC logo, as well as the X that represents the 10th generation of REDMAGIC, which also hilariously looks similar to the X logo. Regardless, the design has always felt advanced without it being too over the top that can plague a lot of gaming focused brands. I will say that I typically like the entry models that don't use the transparent design, since on my personal unit here I am finding that it really is picking up on a lot of fingerprints, which takes away from the beautiful design. Now the included clear case definitely helps mitigate that since it's a matte plastic. And there is a lot to admire here, including the completely flat front and back design, which makes it stand out from other devices in the space. And this all ties nicely into the overall build quality of the REDMAGIC 10 Pro, which feels substantial in the hands, and it's clear that the device is well built with the aluminum center fused to the all-glass design on the front and back, which makes the REDMAGIC 10 Pro feel far more premium than its price point. But the star of the show is the AMOLED display, and for a few iterations of REDMAGIC it really has been, and the 10 Pro continues the tradition of the absolutely insane screen-to-body ratio, which at 95.3% is the highest ever seen in the mobile space. REDMAGIC has somehow managed to decrease the bezels coming from the 9th generation, reducing it to just 1.25mm, and as a result has managed to pack just slightly more screen into the same size chassis. It's one of the best things about gaming on a display like this, and it's further enhanced by the lack of any notch or punch out for the camera, which while the front camera is not going to amaze anyone, it's still great that REDMAGIC continues to push their under-display camera technology, and for a gaming-focused phone, this makes a lot of sense. Simply put, the 10 Pro's display is a dream to game on, which supports up to a 144Hz refresh rate and a max 2000 nits of brightness. It's easily one of my favorite displays to game on, and for good reason. The audio experience is quite good as well, and REDMAGIC has put dual speakers into the 10 Pro, and when held in the landscape orientation, the speakers are then set up in a stereo configuration, which helps with sound separation. On the highest end, the audio manages to stay clear, and in particular when in games, it's a really nice experience when using a controller. For example, I turned the audio to the highest setting during a match of Call of Duty Warzone, and it was a great experience, and I never thought to myself that the audio was ever lacking. And with a REDMAGIC device, we get those gaming-focused customizations on Android, and it all starts with the flick of the dedicated Game Space button on the 10 Pro itself, which launches you into the REDMAGIC Game Space. From here, you can add games that should launch with the Game Space overlay, and for me this has always been a critical feature when needing to adjust performance settings on the fly. For example, here I have Call of Duty Warzone running, and you can see that when I launch it, we get the Energy Cube prompt initially, which optimizes the gaming experience. But the magic really takes place when you swipe in from either the left or right, and then you have the access to the Game Space overlay. Most importantly, I can switch from REDMAGIC's defined performance presets of either Eco, Balanced, or Rise. The overlay gives us additional information like clock speeds on the CPU and GPU side, and you can toggle things on and off with quick access icons on the right side. Another very useful feature is the built-in info bar, which when toggled on allows you to view in-game frame rate and remaining battery life. It's good to note that once a game has been added either automatically or manually, you don't need to launch GameSpace again in order to gain access to the overlay features, which is also a very nice thing. So with all of that, let's now dive into some benchmarks and check out synthetic performance with this new Snapdragon 8 Elite, and I think there's a lot of excitement about the potential of what this new chipset will bring to the table. This is the first time that the Snapdragon 8 Elite has been featured on the channel and represents the latest and most cutting edge from Qualcomm. First things first, let's go ahead and compare the different performance mode presets that are available on the 10 Pro with Eco, Balanced, and Rise. The Diablo mode will not be used here since Rise already runs at the max clocks possible, and it does not differ from the overall scores coming from Rise. After comparing the presets, we will also see how the 8 Elite fares against the prior generation with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3. So let's start with Geekbench 6 to get an idea of overall CPU performance, and starting with the Eco preset, the 10 Pro came in with a multi-core score of 5,148 and a single core score of 947. And when we switch over to the Balanced preset, as expected, the numbers see an appreciable jump with a multi-core score of 6,566 and a single core score of 1,887, which is double the single core score found on the Eco preset. And finally, for the Rise preset, we have another significant jump in performance with a multi-core score of 10,035, and this is the first time that I've ever seen a device hit 10,000 or higher on the multi-core score for Geekbench 6. And then on the single core score, we are at 3,206, which, like the jump from Eco to Balance, represents another sizable boost in performance coming from Balance to Rise. We are definitely seeing a good range here that is appropriate for the scenario, and the scaling makes sense, which is a good thing to see. Let's switch on over to the 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme benchmark and get a sense for GPU performance here. And first, with the Eco preset, we have an overall score of 1,635. Now moving on over to the Balanced preset, and if you're as surprised as I am, I double checked my numbers, but these are in fact accurate, and for the Balanced overall score, we came in at 5,929, which represents a 263% increase over the Eco score. And it clearly shows that the Eco preset is limiting GPU performance, which will be interesting to see what that means in terms of gaming with that preset. Finally, jumping to the Rise preset, and we have an overall score of 7,004, and does provide about an 18% increase in performance from the Balanced preset. And so let's switch on over to the Antutu benchmark, which will give us a good indication of overall performance here with the 8 Elite. And using the Eco preset, the 10 Pro scored 1,158,506, which means that even in the Eco preset, this chipset is able to get over a million score for the Antutu benchmark, which is pretty wild to see. Now for the Balanced preset, things really jump up quite a bit, and nearly doubles with an overall score of 2,200,889, and so that Balanced preset gets us well over the 2 million mark for the Antutu benchmark. Finally, for the Rise preset, we came in with an overall score of 2,700,738, which gives us about a 23% increase in performance over the Balanced preset, and is similar to what we saw with the 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme scores. So let's now check out what these numbers look like against the prior generation, and I will be using my Lenovo Legion Y700, which is the newest version of this tablet that has the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, and is the Gen 3 device that I personally have on hand. Of course, we'll bring in the best numbers that I got with the REDMAGIC 10 Pro and the Snapdragon 8 Elite, first for Geekbench 6, and now bringing in the best numbers that I achieved for the Y700 with that Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, which had an overall score of 6,831 for the multi-core score, and then 2,163 for the single-core score, which shows that the 8 Elite has an improved score of nearly 47% over the 8 Gen 3 multi-core score, and about 48% for the single-core score, and is in line with the claims made by Qualcomm. So let's quickly check out how the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 stacks up against the 8 Elite in the 3D Mark benchmark, with the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 coming in with an overall score of 5,033, and it represents about a 39% uplift for the Snapdragon 8 Elite. What's pretty interesting to see here is that the numbers for the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 are still below what we achieved with the Snapdragon 8 Elite using the Balanced preset. Finally, let's look at the Antutu overall score, and the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 managed a score of 2,041,899, and unsurprisingly, the Snapdragon 8 Elite provides a nice boost in performance, coming in with a 32% higher overall score over the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3. Now, one thing I wanted to examine while talking about benchmarks is the thermal stability using the 3D Mark Wildlife Extreme stress test, and I was curious to see how the 10 Pro performs with the active cooling being used. So using the Rise mode with the fan on, the REDMAGIC 10 Pro had a 68.5% thermal stability, which is a lot lower than I expected to see, and it will be interesting to see how that translates to real-world gaming. But given the gaming environment on Android, I don't think we'll be pushing the 8 Elite to this point all too often. And so before we dive into gaming, I always love to gather up some telescopic controller options and see how the 10 Pro will fit with various options. The nice thing here is that the 10 Pro is a phone, so many telescopic controllers should work quite well with it. But you can probably see that I have rounded up various options from the most compact to some larger ones. Let's start out with the Razer Kishi V2 Pro, which is the smallest of the telescopic options, and this one does not work with the 10 Pro when it has its slim case on, so you will need to remove the case in order to use the Kishi V2 Pro. Now moving to the backbone controller, and this is another one that unfortunately will not work with the included case on the 10 Pro, and likewise will need the case removed in order to work with this device. And here's the Asus ROG Tessin, which has grown on me quite a bit as a very compact option that has great controls and comfort, and the best thing about the Tessin is that it works with the 10 Pro with the included case on or off, so it makes it nice and easy to just pop on the controller. The Tessin actually works better with the case on because the bezels are so thin on the 10 Pro that part of the lip on the Tessin covers the display, so with the case on we get a little bit of separation, which is useful here. The other very cool thing about the Tessin is its ability to fold up, and so this really is a great compact option, especially if you're considering to travel with it. We've got one more compact option with the Gamesir X2S, and this controller will have no issues working with the case on or off, and the X2S comes in a Bluetooth or USB-C variant, and I have confirmed that both models work great with the 10 Pro. The X2S is a very solid and affordable option. Now moving up in size to something a bit more standard, here I have the awesome REDMAGIC branded ShadowBlade 2, which is just a rebrand of the Gamesir G8 Galileo. That has been a longtime favorite of mine for various devices. The ShadowBlade 2 is a USB-C controller, and it does work great with a case on or off with the 10 Pro. I've got one more Gamesir controller with the updated G8 Plus, and this is easily one of my favorite telescopic controllers ever just for its sheer flexibility to accommodate devices of all sizes with great plastics, build quality, and controls. It's really a great overall option, and it's another that works very well with the REDMAGIC 10 Pro, using the case or without the case. And now we have the ABXYlute S9, which is the newcomer here, and this is another very nice option on the larger side that accommodates up to smaller sized tablets like the Legion Y700. For the REDMAGIC 10 Pro, this is another controller that works great with the case on or off, and this is a USB Type-C controller, so you do get that wired connection, but also has the ability to spoof an Xbox 360 controller through a Bluetooth connection. Finally, we have the most expensive and largest option here with the Razer Kishi Ultra, and I really enjoy this telescopic controller quite a bit, but unfortunately its price point can make it a tough recommendation, which retails for $150 US, but is a very comfortable controller with great full-size controls. The Kishi Ultra is another that works great with the 10 Pro with either the case on or off. And so it's pretty clear that we have quite a number of choices for the 10 Pro to game with. And now that we've properly geared up, it's time to head on over into the world of Android gaming and test out a few games with the new Snapdragon 8 Elite chipset. This is going to be pretty interesting because performance was already pretty solid with the prior generation using the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, and there's really only a few outliers that pushed it hard on the native Android side. But I will be curious about efficiency, since with that extra power overhead, we could potentially get the same experience, but with much less power requirements, and for a mobile device, that's never a bad thing. Let's just get right into it and start out with Wuthering Waves, which is definitely a pretty demanding game, but I was blown away that here on the 10 Pro, I am set to use only the Eco preset, and the game is doing a very solid job maintaining its target frame rate of 60 frames per second. I have Wuthering Waves here set to use the ultra high resolution, high special effects quality, ultra high shadow quality with FSR off, and this is just unbelievable performance, which again is only at the Eco preset and gives us some room to adjust if needed. Now moving on to another popular and demanding game, I have Call of Duty Warzone set to use the peak visual quality with an uncapped FPS target and the high preset for resolution, upscaling quality, and shadow quality using just the balanced performance preset on the 10 Pro, and the game is staying well above 60 frames per second and at many points closer to 90 frames per second, again just using the balanced preset here on the REDMAGIC 10 Pro. And of course, let's check in with another popular shooter. We have Fortnite here set to use the 90 frames per second target with the epic quality preset 100% 3D resolution, and high texture quality with the REDMAGIC 10 Pro's balanced performance preset, and the 10 Pro doesn't seem to be breaking much of a sweat here, with the frame rate locked to 90 throughout the entirety of a match from start to finish. This is pretty much the best this game has ever run on a mobile device, and we're not even using the highest performance preset. And given what we've seen so far from the 10 Pro, I don't think it's all too surprising that Diablo Immortal is another game that runs very well on this device. Diablo Immortal probably has the lightest requirements out of the games shown so far, and this was a game that already was able to be maxed out on the Snapdragon 8 Gen 3, and so nothing changes here. But the exciting thing to see is that Diablo Immortal runs with the highest settings across the board, using just the Eco Performance preset on the REDMAGIC 10 Pro, which means that we can stretch that battery life without the loss of any visual fidelity on a game like Diablo Immortal. I've got one last popular free-to-play game with Real Racing 3, and I've never actually featured this game on the channel before, despite it being around a long time on the Google Play Store. The cool thing about Real Racing 3 is that it supports the 144Hz display, and so we are able to enjoy this game at 144 frames per second on the REDMAGIC 10 Pro. And for a racing game, this just flies and feels very smooth, and best of all, we're just using the balanced performance preset to achieve this level of performance with the REDMAGIC 10 Pro. And finally, let's check out a great premium experience that received a port to the Google Play Store. Wreckfest is a fantastic port that also is quite a demanding game, and so it's a great way to push the Snapdragon 8 Elite and make it work just a little bit. I have the 10 Pro set to use the balanced performance preset, and Wreckfest is set to use the highest settings possible. So we've got the high texture quality, max FPS target, extreme screen scaling, the quality preset for dynamic resolution, high shadow quality, ultra setting for grass amount, and high effects quality. The game looks gorgeous with these settings, and despite maxing out the settings, the game runs very well with just the balanced preset. This is an awesome way to play this game, especially when paired with a telescopic controller. And let's now head into the world of emulation, and we will start out first with the Gamecube, using the Dolphin emulator straight from the Google Play Store. I've got Rogue Squadron 2, which is a very difficult game to run, and here we are set to use 5 times the native resolution of the Gamecube, using the balanced performance preset, which is absolutely unnecessary, and this game runs very well despite it being a problematic game. We are able to enjoy this one with this level of upscaling on the REDMAGIC 10 Pro. And of course, something lighter will have no issues maxing out Dolphin's upscaling options, such as Beautiful Joe here, which is set to use 6 times the native resolution of Gamecube, and is the equivalent of 4K, and for this, I'm set to use the balanced preset here again, which basically means that Gamecube emulation is going to be absolutely no problem for the Snapdragon 8 Elite, and doesn't really require anything higher than the balanced preset. Given the settings I'm using here, you could easily turn down the resolution scaling and enjoy Gamecube emulation using just the Eco preset for the best battery life, and this is exactly what you want to see from a powerful chipset like the 8 Elite, which not only allows us to push the limits of emulation, but also on the opposite end when it comes to efficiency. And much of this same experience translates over to the Nintendo Wii, with games like Sonic Colors here running at the max upscaling available, which again is 6 times the native resolution of the Wii and equivalent to 4K, and this game looks just incredible with this level of upscaling on this device. Again, it's definitely overkill given the resolution of the screen, but it's still fun to see how hard we can push Wii emulation, which again is set to use the balanced preset on the REDMAGIC 10 Pro, and Sonic Colors manages to stay at its target of 30 frames per second. Let's now hop on over to some Wii U emulation using this CMU emulator for Android, which is still very much early in development, and so there's only a limited amount of titles that work, but what does work, works quite well, and with the muscle of the 8 Elite, we are able to start pushing these Wii U titles beyond their native 720 or 1080p resolutions. I always have to load up one of my personal favorite titles for the Wii U. Fast Racing Neo is an awesome futuristic racing style game that released for the Nintendo eShop on the Wii U, and while the emulation is not quite perfect yet, this is still very playable, and I have the game set to run at an ultra wide resolution of 2560 by 1080. So in-game we are getting to enjoy the wider aspect ratio that we have here on the REDMAGIC 10 Pro, and not only that, but this is a game that we can set a higher frame rate than the standard 30 or 60, and for this game I am using 120 frames per second. And it's just incredible to see this game flying at this speed and high frame rate. I do have the 10 Pro set to use the Rise performance setting so that we can enjoy 120 frames per second, but you can alternatively cap the frame rate and go with a higher internal resolution, but I think it's awesome to be able to make use of the higher refresh rate that we have with the 10 Pro's display. And another great game by the same studio, Shinen, is Nano Assault Neo, which is another eShop title that was released for the Wii U. Unfortunately for this game, I don't have as many options to adjust the graphic settings, and so we are limited to the game's native frame rate. And instead, I decided to crank up the internal resolution to 2560 by 1440, which is pretty close to the resolution of the 10 Pro's display, and well beyond the default 720p resolution that the game enjoyed on the Wii U. It's another game that just looks incredible here, but this time we can enjoy the higher internal resolution at its native 60 frames per second target, using just the balanced preset. And finally, let's switch, no pun intended, on over to the Nintendo Switch, which really is one of the best ways we can push hardware on Android. And as long as the driver support as well as the emulator compatibility is there, we should be able to get some impressive results with the 8 Elite. For this section, I will be alternating between Sudachi and the new Citron emulators for Switch, and I will let you know throughout which one I am using. Definitely let me know down in the comments if you'd like to see me do a focused showcase of Switch emulation with the 8 Elite like I've done in the past for other devices. Now, I was pretty impressed by performance using just the balanced preset in games like Need for Speed Hot Pursuit Remastered, Prince of Persia The Lost Crown, Persona 5 Royal, and Sonic Generations are all running well above their native Switch resolution at 2 times their resolution using docked mode, which means these games are all running here at a 4K resolution, and these games look better and run better here on the 10 Pro with the 8 Elite than they ever have on a Nintendo Switch natively. And of course, we can't forget about Sony, and in particular the PlayStation 2 using Nether SX2. And this is pretty exciting because for essentially the entirety of the PlayStation 2 library here, we can get away with not only enjoying the ability to upscale the resolution, but for the most part we can do it just using the Eco preset. For example, I tested God of War 2 here with each of the built-in performance presets, starting first with just the Eco preset, and God of War 2 was able to run at 3 times the native resolution of the PlayStation 2, which is just amazing to think about given there are devices out there that struggle with this game even at native resolution. The performance is quite amazing here, and we will see in just a little bit what that means in terms of battery life. Now, if we wanted to go with a 4 times native resolution upscale, we would need to change the REDMAGIC 10 Pro to use the balance preset. And finally, if we wanted to enjoy a 5 times native resolution upscale, we would again need to bump up to use the Rise preset. The reality here is that for most, the Eco preset with a nice upscaling of about 3x is more than enough, which gives us the best balance between visual fidelity and battery life. It's incredible to have the ability to adjust performance on the device and PlayStation 2 emulation in so many ways, which is exactly what I hope to see from the REDMAGIC 10 Pro and the Snapdragon 8 Elite. Basically, the limitation with PlayStation 2 emulation is not the hardware at this point, and every game that Nether SX2 is able to play will run here on the REDMAGIC 10 Pro without much issue, and best of all, we can do it without really needing to push that hardware, and even for the more problematic titles like Sly 2 and Need for Speed Most Wanted, or harder to run games like Shadow of the Colossus, we have more than enough of an overhead here to brute force just about everything and still enjoy upscaling beyond the PlayStation 2's native resolution. Unfortunately, PS2 emulation on Android is at a dead end, so we may never see an emulator truly optimized for a chipset like the 8 Elite. Now, despite performance being pretty incredible on everything that we've seen in this video, it's not all perfect. And unfortunately, with the cutting edge does come some issues because of how new the chipset here is. I had lots of issues with Winlator, for example, and I spent an entire day trying to get games running with various versions of Winlator and with not much to show for it. There is no doubt that the lack of driver maturity is impacting compatibility here, and I had the same issue when playing certain games with Switch emulation using the various options available. Despite being able to use custom drivers for Switch emulation thanks to the Adreno graphics, the custom drivers won't do much good since they don't support the chipset currently. I am looking forward to seeing the driver support improve because there's so much potential here that we've not been able to tap into, and it's definitely disappointing for me personally that Winlator was such an issue given the great success I've had with it in the past, especially on far less powerful hardware. So let's wrap up all of our gameplay with one last thing to test, and that's some game streaming from a local PC using Moonlight with Sunshine, which is one of my favorite and really the best way to stream PC games locally. Given that we also have a display that is capable of 144Hz refresh rate, there's no better way to utilize the display on hand than by streaming from a PC. I have Moonlight here set to use the native resolution of the REDMAGIC 10 Pro with the native 144Hz refresh rate, and of course with my favorite game to test with, which is Ori and the Will of the Wisps, making full use of the 144Hz display. And as you can see here, the experience is very solid as long as your network is capable of handling this. The average decoding times for the device is around 6 to 8 milliseconds using the auto setting for the decoder options, and is the best that I could achieve here with the 10 Pro, which is very solid and results in an excellent streaming experience. So it's time to check in on the battery performance here, and of course we will start out with a much lighter test using Mega Man X2 for the Super Nintendo. And I have the REDMAGIC 10 Pro set to use the Eco mode with the battery saver option on. In addition, I've got the Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and the fan turned off with the 10 Pro set at 50% brightness and volume, and with its 7050 mAh battery, the 10 Pro managed just over 22 hours of on-screen time, which will certainly cover your SNES gaming for quite some time. Now let's bump things up a bit, and this time around let's enjoy Kratos rolling repeatedly with the same Eco preset, but with the battery saver option turned off. Despite the Eco preset, God of War 2 is set to use 3 times the native resolution of the PlayStation 2. We're still set to use 50% brightness and volume with the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth still turned off, but this time around I do have the fan set to the intelligent preset, and I will note that the fan pretty much started to kick in at about 15 minutes into the battery test. Now you might notice on screen that there are occasional dips in the performance, and this only started about 6.5 hours into the test, because of Android starting to throttle performance with the 3% battery life remaining, which means that the 10 Pro managed nearly 6.5 hours of full performance for God of War 2 at 3 times the native resolution. Now I've done this God of War 2 test on tons of different devices, and given that we are set to use 3 times the native resolution, which can also be turned down to improve battery life, the results here are very impressive, and being able to achieve 6.5 hours with a game like God of War 2 is definitely notable. And checking in with the charging times, at the 30-minute mark using the included 100-watt fast charger, the 10 Pro was at 73%, and the total 0% to 100% charge time was 46 minutes, which is definitely very fast and lets you get back up and running with very little downtime. And there's no doubt about it, the REDMAGIC 10 Pro brings unbelievable performance, especially at its base price point. And I think for someone looking at a smartphone that can do serious and dedicated gaming, the 10 Pro will be a great option. And much like its predecessors, if you want the best performance for the best price, the REDMAGIC 10 Pro will be hard to beat. Now, it won't have the best cameras, and it does lack things like waterproofing, but if those things are not essential to you, then the 10 Pro is an excellent choice and becomes the one to go for in place of the REDMAGIC 9, and especially if you're making the jump from the 8 or an older model. I do have concerns about its thermal stability, especially when pushed very hard. And fortunately for the 8 Elite, there's not a whole lot that really needs to push it for a sustained amount of time, but that does leave concern about future-proofing, since there will no doubt be more in the future that can take advantage of the higher end of the capabilities of the 8 Elite, which means we could very well hit those thermal thresholds. Regardless, for most users, surprisingly the Eco and Balance presets will handle the job well. And with that in mind, it's a lot of performance for the price, and it is now the new standard for Android devices. I look forward to checking back in a little bit with the 8 Elite and maybe do some dedicated showcases with emulation and hopefully some win later and keep track of the progress of this very new chipset from Qualcomm. But until then, as always, I am the Retro Tech Dad, and thank you so much for watching.